Pay attention to the elderly man in the khaki jacket and brown cap. His name is Walter Hensley. He is 76 years old. Every morning at 6:15 a.m., he walks the same route through Riverside Park in Columbus, Ohio. The same 3-mile loop, the same rest stops, the same wave to the crossing guard at Maple Street. This morning, October 3rd, 2023, would be different. Walter leaves his apartment building at exactly 6:13 a.m. The lobby security camera captures him adjusting his cap, checking his watch. He carries nothing but his house keys and a small bottle of water. His routine is precise, comforting, safe. Now, pay attention to the vehicle in the parking lot behind him. A dark blue sedan, Ohio plates. The engine is running. The driver sits motionless behind the wheel, watching Walter's building entrance. The driver has been there since 5:47 a.m. Within 90 minutes, Walter Hensley would be gone. By 8 a.m., his daughter would file a missing person report. By noon, every camera in a 2-mile radius would be reviewed. By evening, Columbus police would be searching for more than just a missing elderly man. They would be hunting a predator. Walter Hensley was not a complicated man. He had been a high school math teacher for 41 years, widowed for 6. His wife Margaret died of cancer in 2017, and the grief had been staggering. But Walter rebuilt his life with the same methodical precision he'd brought to teaching geometry. The morning walk was everything. It kept him healthy. It kept him connected to the world. It gave structure to days that otherwise stretched empty and long. His daughter, Patricia Hensley Davis, spoke to him every evening at 7:00 p.m. He never missed a call. Never. On October 3rd, the call went to voicemail. Patricia knew immediately something was catastrophically wrong. At 6:24 a.m., Walter enters Riverside Park through the main entrance on Oakwood Avenue. A traffic camera captures him walking steadily, his gait strong for a man his age. He disappears into the tree line along the Eastern Trail. At 6:31 a.m., a park maintenance worker sees him resting on the bench near the fountain. Walter gives his usual friendly nod. At 6:47 a.m., another park visitor, a woman jogging with her dog, passes him on the North Loop Trail. She would later tell investigators he seemed perfectly fine, alert, content. At 7:02 a.m., Walter should have exited the park at the Riverside Avenue gate. Security footage shows the exit clearly. Walter never appears. Somewhere in those woods, in that 15-minute window, Walter Hensley vanished. Patricia arrived at her father's apartment at 8:30 a.m. She had a key. The apartment was neat, orderly, untouched. His medication sat on the kitchen counter. He hadn't taken his morning pills. His wallet and phone were on the dresser. He never left without his phone. She called the police immediately. Columbus police initially treated this as a standard missing elderly person case. Walter was 76. Perhaps he'd become disoriented. Perhaps he'd had a medical emergency somewhere in the park. Search and rescue teams were deployed. Volunteers combed the trails. Helicopters scanned the wooded areas. They found nothing. No body, no clothing, no sign of distress or injury. It was as if the park had simply swallowed him whole. By 2:00 p.m., Detective Aaron Vasquez was assigned to the case. Vasquez was a 22-year veteran with the Columbus Police Department. He had worked missing persons, homicides, and elder abuse cases. He knew the statistics. Elderly men who disappeared during routine activities rarely vanished voluntarily. Vasquez requested all available surveillance footage within a 3-mile radius of the park. What he found changed everything. The dark blue sedan appeared on 4 different cameras that morning. At 5:47 a.m., it was parked outside Walter's apartment building. Engine running, waiting. At 6:14 a.m., it followed Walter's car, though Walter was walking. The vehicle maintained a careful distance, circling the block. At 6:22 a.m., it entered Riverside Park's north parking lot. The lot was nearly empty at that hour. At 7:18 a.m., it exited the park, rapidly. The driver wore sunglasses and a baseball cap. The passenger seat appeared empty, but the rear passenger window, the one facing away from the camera, appeared slightly fogged, as if someone were breathing in the back seat. Detective Vasquez froze the image. He called for the traffic unit to pull every available camera on the vehicle's route after leaving the park. The hunt was no longer for a disoriented elderly man. It was for an abduction suspect. The vehicle was registered to a man named Kwame Osei. He was 38 years old, originally from Ghana, and had immigrated to the United States in 2009. He worked as a home health care aide through a private placement agency called Comfort Care Services. Osei had no criminal record, no complaints, no red flags in his employment history. But there was a connection. 3 months earlier, Comfort Care Services had sent Osei to conduct a consultation at Walter Hensley's apartment. Patricia had arranged it, worried about her father living alone. Walter had refused the services. He was independent. He didn't need help. The consultation lasted 45 minutes. Osei had been inside Walter's home. He had seen the routine, the schedule, the solitary life of a widower with no one checking on him until evening. Detective Vasquez obtained a warrant for Osei's residence and vehicle within 3 hours. Kwame Osei lived in a small rental house in Whitehall, a suburb southeast of Columbus. He lived alone. Neighbors described him as quiet, polite, kept to himself. When police arrived at 4:17 p.m. on October 3rd, Osei's vehicle was parked in the driveway, the dark blue sedan, Ohio plates matching the footage. The vehicle was locked. The house appeared empty. Officers secured a perimeter. Vasquez called for a tactical entry team and prepared to execute the search warrant. At 4:39 p.m., the front door opened. Kwame Osei stepped onto the porch, hands raised. He said nothing. He made no attempt to resist. He simply stood there, expressionless, as officers surrounded him. Vasquez approached. He asked one question. "Where is Walter Hensley?" Osei's response was chilling in its simplicity. He wanted to speak to a lawyer. The search of Osei's property began immediately. In the vehicle, forensic teams found traces of blood on the rear passenger seat. Type O positive. Walter Hensley's blood type. DNA confirmation would take 48 hours, but the presumptive field test was positive. They found strands of gray hair, fibers matching Walter's khaki jacket, a small scuff mark on the interior door panel, consistent with someone trying to kick their way out. In the garage, investigators found a collection that made their blood run cold. Zip ties, duct tape, plastic sheeting, a wooden chair with restraint marks on the arms, and a cell phone, not Osei's. The phone was password protected, but the lock screen displayed a photo of 2 smiling grandchildren. Patricia would later confirm it was her father's phone, but Walter Hensley was not in the house. He was not in the garage. Cadaver dogs were brought in. They alerted in the garage and in the trunk of the sedan. But there was no body. Detective Vasquez returned to the surveillance footage. He tracked the sedan's movements after it left Riverside Park. The vehicle traveled east on Interstate 70 for approximately 40 minutes. It exited at County Road 58, a rural area known for abandoned farmland and scattered properties. The vehicle disappeared into an area with no traffic cameras, no businesses, no surveillance of any kind. Aerial searches of the area began immediately. Search and rescue teams scoured abandoned structures. Dive teams checked ponds and retention basins. They found nothing. Kwame Osei, held without bail on preliminary charges of kidnapping, refused to speak. His court-appointed attorney advised complete silence. Osei followed that advice to the letter. 76-year-old Walter Hensley had been missing for 26 hours. The clock was ticking. On October 4th, forensic analysts began examining Osei's phone and computer. What they discovered painted a disturbing picture. Osei had been researching elder abuse cases, specifically cases where elderly victims had been coerced into changing their wills or transferring property. He had bookmarked articles about financial exploitation of seniors living alone. His browser history showed repeated searches for Walter Hensley's name, property records, tax assessments, probate court filings from Margaret Hensley's estate. Walter Hensley owned his apartment outright. He had a pension, a modest but comfortable savings account, no debt, no living spouse, one daughter who lived across town. To someone like Kwame Osei, Walter Hensley represented something very specific: a vulnerable target. The digital forensics team made another discovery. Osei's phone contained photographs, dozens of them, all taken discreetly, apparently without the subject's knowledge. Elderly men and women, in parking lots, at grocery stores, walking in parks. 12 different individuals, all over the age of 65, all apparently living alone. This was not Osei's first target. Detective Vasquez assembled a task force. They began identifying the individuals in the photographs. 7 were clients Osei had visited through Comfort Care Services. 3 others lived in neighborhoods where Osei had worked. 2 could not be immediately identified. The team reached out to each person. All were alive. All were unharmed. None reported any suspicious activity, but 6 of them reported receiving phone calls in recent weeks. Calls from unknown numbers. Someone claiming to represent a financial services company, asking about their assets and living situations. They had all hung up, dismissing it as a scam. The calls had come from burner phones purchased at various Columbus area stores. Security footage from one store showed Kwame Osei making the purchase. He had been planning something. Walter Hensley had become the execution of that plan. But what was Osei's endgame? Where was Walter? On October 5th, 48 hours after Walter disappeared, Detective Vasquez received a call from the forensic team. They had found something on Osei's laptop, a deleted file, partially recovered. It was a document titled Contract Template. The document was a forged power of attorney form. It granted Kwame Osei full legal authority to manage the finances of the signatory. The signature line was blank. The date field was pre-filled, October 3rd, 2023. Osei's plan had been simple and brutal. Abduct an elderly target. Hold them long enough to coerce a signature on the power of attorney. Use that authority to liquidate assets. Disappear before anyone noticed. Walter Hensley, with no spouse and limited family contact, was the perfect victim. But something had gone wrong. Osei was in custody. The plan had collapsed. So where was Walter? Vasquez returned to the rural area where the sedan had traveled on October 3rd. The team expanded their search radius. They knocked on doors of the few occupied properties in the area. Most residents hadn't noticed anything unusual, but one farmer remembered something. On the morning of October 3rd, he'd seen a dark blue sedan parked near an abandoned grain silo approximately 2 miles off County Road 58. The silo had been unused for 15 years. The property was overgrown and inaccessible, except by a narrow dirt access road. The farmer hadn't thought much of it at the time. People sometimes dumped trash out there. Search teams were dispatched immediately. At 3:47 p.m. on October 5th, officers reached the abandoned grain silo. The structure was collapsing, rusted, surrounded by head-high weeds and fallen timbers. The access door hung open on broken hinges. Inside, the air was thick and stagnant. Shafts of light filtered through holes in the metal walls. The concrete floor was littered with debris and animal droppings. In the far corner, partially hidden behind a fallen beam, they found him. Walter Hensley was alive. He was bound with zip ties. His mouth was covered with duct tape. He was severely dehydrated, hypothermic, and in shock. But he was breathing. Paramedics stabilized Walter at the scene before transporting him to Riverside Methodist Hospital. He had been without food or water for nearly 58 hours. His core body temperature was dangerously low. He had pressure sores on his wrists and ankles from the restraints, but he was alive. He was conscious. He would survive. Patricia was at the hospital when the ambulance arrived. She later told reporters she couldn't find words. She simply held her father's hand while doctors worked. Walter spent 6 days in intensive care. He suffered kidney damage from dehydration, but doctors expected a full recovery. The investigators were stunned. Osei had abandoned Walter in that silo, assuming he would die there. It would look like an elderly man who had wandered off and succumbed to exposure. By the time anyone found the body, if anyone ever did, the connection to Osei would be impossible to prove. But Walter Hensley survived, and he could identify his abductor. Kwame Osei was charged with kidnapping, attempted murder, financial exploitation of an elderly person, and assault. Prosecutors filed additional charges related to the stalking and surveillance of the other 12 elderly individuals identified in his photographs. The trial began on March 4, 2024. The evidence was overwhelming. Surveillance footage, DNA evidence, digital forensics, the forged power of attorney form, and Walter Hensley's testimony. Walter took the stand on the fourth day of the trial. He was still frail, his voice weak, but his memory was clear. He described waking up to find Osei standing over him in the park. He described the vehicle, the drive, the hours in that cold, dark silo, believing he would die there. The defense argued diminished capacity. Osei had suffered trauma during his immigration journey. He had struggled financially. He had untreated mental health issues. The prosecution acknowledged these factors, but emphasized the calculated nature of the crimes, the planning, the research, the selection of vulnerable targets. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Kwame Osei was convicted on all counts. On May 17, 2024, Judge Martin Caldwell sentenced Osei to 42 years in prison without the possibility of parole for 30 years. Osei showed no emotion as the sentence was read. Walter Hensley did not attend the sentencing. His physical health had recovered, but the psychological trauma was profound. He no longer took morning walks. He no longer lived alone. Patricia had moved him into her home, where he occupied the guest room and spent his days reading and working on jigsaw puzzles. The routine that had defined his life, the structure that had sustained him after Margaret's death, was shattered. He could not rebuild it. Comfort Care Services conducted an internal review of their hiring and vetting procedures. They implemented enhanced background checks and mandatory psychological evaluations for all home healthcare workers. They also established a client safety hotline for reporting suspicious behavior. The case prompted Ohio lawmakers to introduce legislation strengthening protections for elderly individuals living alone. The bill, known as Walter's Law, requires mandatory wellness checks for seniors who utilize in-home care consultations but decline services. It passed unanimously in both chambers and was signed into law in August 2024. Walter Hensley turned 77 on December 8, 2024. Patricia threw a small party at her home. Walter's grandchildren were there, a few close friends, a cake. Walter smiled. He thanked everyone. He seemed genuinely happy. But Patricia noticed he kept glancing toward the windows, checking, watching, making sure no one was in the driveway. No one was waiting. The trauma of those 58 hours would never fully fade. The abandoned grain silo was demolished in September 2024. The property owner, shaken by what had occurred on his land, wanted no reminder of the structure where Walter Hensley had nearly died. A small memorial marker was placed near the site. It reads, "In recognition of Walter Hensley's strength and survival, October 2023. Walter has never visited it. He has no desire to return to that place. Kwame Osei is currently incarcerated at the Marion Correctional Institution in Ohio. He has filed an appeal, arguing ineffective counsel and judicial error. The appeal is pending. The other 12 individuals identified in Osei's photographs have been notified and offered protective services. None have reported further suspicious activity. Investigators continue to review unsolved cases involving elderly victims in the Columbus area. They are looking for patterns. For connections to Osei's movements and employment history, so far, no additional victims have been confirmed. Walter Hensley survived because Detective Aaron Vasquez moved quickly, because surveillance cameras captured just enough, because a farmer remembered a dark blue sedan near an abandoned silo. He survived because 58 hours without food or water, while catastrophic, was not quite long enough to kill a man as stubborn and resilient as Walter Hensley. He survived. That's what matters most. But the man who left his apartment at 6:13 a.m. on October the 3rd, 2023, the man who walked the same 3-mile loop every morning, who waved to the crossing guard, who found structure and purpose in routine, that man did not return. Walter Hensley is alive, but the morning walks are over. The park is a place he will never visit again.